Hi. So last time we left off talking about identity and how identity is variously constructed through these different concepts of race, ethnicity, gender, and also more recently, nationalism. And so today we're going to start a new topic. And that topic is, how do we understand the world? And is it true? And how do we know if it's true? What is magic, witchcraft, religion, and science? Before jumping in, you should keep in mind for the discussion today that everyone is absolutely entitled to their own beliefs, and I in no way mean to question or disrespect that. However, this is an anthropology class, and thus, as with all topics, we'll be examining religion, or what anthropologists might call beliefs and practices in the supernatural, from a cross-cultural comparative perspective. And so we're not concerned, we're going to be looking at lots of different examples cross-culturally. We're not concerned with right or wrong or truth, superiority or inferiority, better or worse. We're not concerned with any of that in terms of the different belief systems. We're cultural relativists, meaning one sort of system, one society, their beliefs and practices are not inherently superior or inferior to another. They're different for different reasons, cultural relativism. And so we are concerned in our discussion with religion and witchcraft and magic, or what you probably refer to as religion. Anthropologists would also include magic and witchcraft with religion. And so we would refer to all three as beliefs and practices in the supernatural. And so we are concerned with the how is it done? What does it look like? And also the why. Why do people practice these different beliefs and customs? Why do they do it? What do they do it for? Religion, here to referred to as religion, which again includes witchcraft and magic. It's these various beliefs and practices in the supernatural. That's just a really big word full of mouths, or mouthful of words. So religion from here on out. All cultures have some form of what we call religion. It's one of those interesting universals. Not necessarily all people follow a religion, but all societies have some type of what we call religion. It's part of worldview, how people perceive and interpret the world around them, interpret their reality, which again in turn patterns their behavior. And so much of what the other does to us seems weird or exotic or strange or even completely irrational. And hopefully today you'll come to see that the other groups of people, whether they're practicing witchcraft or magic or some type of religion, they're not really doing anything so different from what many of us also do. Many of you also practice magic. You just don't perceive it as such, and you don't label it as such. Magic is what other people do, right? Not us. Hopefully we can take a closer look at that today. And so because every society has what we call a form of what we call religion, it sort of begs the question. It's one of those rare universals. We see it across the entire species. So is there something sort of significant or adaptive about religion for people that helps them live their lives? Because again, we see it in every society. It begs the question, is there a reason for that? Is there an explanation for that? Is it somehow adaptive or serve some other purpose for people? So Peoples and Bailey give three sort of explanations for the existence of religion, why people have it, why it exists universally. What's it do for people? And the three explanations are psychological, social, and also what they call the cognitive and intellectual. So I want to speak just for a minute about each. It's interesting. You should read it in the book and also maybe take some notes right now because you won't find this in the lecture elsewhere. So I'm just taking a sip of my coffee with bourbon in it. Just kidding. First, the psychological explanation. These folks would say religion, practices, beliefs in the supernatural exist because the world is a stressful place, psychologically, right? There's a lot of things to worry about. People die, relatives, loved ones get sick, pass away. Our relationships might not go the way we want. Accidents happen, we get hurt. And so the psychological explanation says this is sort of why religion exists. It fulfills a psychological function for people. It's a coping mechanism. It allows them to deal with stressful events in their lives. So just for example, and your book gives numerous, the notion that heaven exists in Christianity. Even though you're going to die, it's okay. You're going to go to this great place that's actually even better than life on earth. So it's sort of, again, a coping mechanism, as you will. It provides psychological relief for things that are stressful or things that are scary, quite frankly. The critique of the psychological explanation is that while it may help people cope, it might help with mental health, it can also do the exact opposite. So for example, you might go to heaven, you might also go to hell, right? And be eternally damned and tortured. What sort of anxieties is that relieving for people? And Peebles and Bailey give another example of this group. I don't remember quite where they were from. I'd reference you to the text. And their afterlife, no matter if you're good or bad or a piece of shit on earth, their afterlife sucks for everybody. It's sort of a scary land of the dead type place, no matter who you are, no matter how well you lived your life. So again, whose anxieties are being relieved by that belief system, right? That's the critique of the psychological. They all have strengths and they all have weaknesses. The second explanation is the sociological explanation. And essentially, these folks say religion exists to help provide social cohesion and keep societies organized and functioning. It's necessary to organize groups of people. So, for example, like the 10 Commandments in Christianity, thou shalt not kill, or da-da-da. So the idea is it instills good moral values in people, which is good for the group, the society as a whole. So there's lots of examples of religions doing that. There's also the complete opposite, the critique of the sociological explanation. For example, the Crusades, in which people in the name of Christianity went to war and killed, thousands and tens and hundreds of thousands of people. So in what way is that beneficial for the society, right? So critique of the social explanation. And then the third explanation, Peebles and Bailey touch on, they call it the cognitive or intellectual. And I also refer to it as the evolutionary explanation. And the idea behind this one, it's an interesting one, that religion is sort of, it's related to this idea of being adaptive for us. It's kind of built into us as a species. So sort of bear with me. I'm not going to ask you details about this, but it's really interesting. This guy, Scott Atran, writes about this in Gods We Trust. And he writes about these things, the sort of beginning of his argument is these things called evolutionary landscapes in the minds of people. What that means is kind of like when we talked about structuralism. People across the world, regardless of culture, all have basic mental capacities, like recognizing binary opposites, up, down, left, right, dark, light. Everyone, we might define it different, we might recognize different things, but everyone around the world recognizes binary opposites. It's one of those mental capabilities that's just built into the way our brain works. And there's other mental landscapes that predispose us to certain ways of thinking. I won't get into them. So he talks about these mental landscapes. And then on top of that, we are also evolved something called fight or flight, right? So if there's a threat, we either fight, defend ourselves, or run and try. It increases our survival, right? So building on this, Atran says then, suppose a horticulturalist in South America is out hunting and they hear a rustle in the bushes. Now, fight or flight would say that could be a jaguar or an animal waiting to jump out and attack them, right? So that sort of visceral reaction that you can feel it in your chest, that little bump of anxiety or, oh, I got to do something, right? That's adaptive for us. It saves our life often when we are under threat. So another thing going on in the human mental landscape is also people reasoning that there's things, this is sort of the cognitive side, things that they don't understand, right? Like lightning and maybe shooting stars or volcanic eruptions or really nasty illnesses or diseases. Things that can't really be explained at this time, right? At least pre-Western science. And so people would reason, well, there must be some sort of supernatural explanation for this because they can't tangibly identify what's causing these things. And this is where religion, beliefs and practices in the supernatural come along. So that when you hear a random thunderclap or noise, that could be spiritual forces, the gods or spirits or whatever it is. Because people sort of believe that the supernatural gives a shit about worldly affairs. And so the idea is, and I usually like to do this in class, on a table, and usually people kind of jump and get scared. That's that fight or flight reaction, right, to save your life. And so Scott Atran reasons that from this, from the tiger or the jaguar jumping out of the bushes, that fight or flight, and also combined with the idea of people reasoning that supernatural beings exist and punish or help people, then better to sort of attribute those loud noises or potentially dangerous things you see, or the unexplainable things, better to attribute that to a powerful being, a supernatural power, and behave correctly so that you don't get punished. Better to do that, whether it's true or not, because if you believe and it's true, things will go well for you. If you believe and it's not true, no real harm done. If you don't believe in the supernatural and it's real, you're screwed. And so Stuart Guthrie, famous anthropologist, said, then religion is a good bet, right? Sort of adaptive, if you will. That's sort of the intellectual, cognitive, evolutionary explanation, really overgeneralized. Interesting stuff. So these are some of the explanations trying to get at, why do we see religion across all societies? What is it? What does it do for people? So religion, what is religion? In any society, it's a powerful, organized definition of how things are in the world and also how they should be. It's defined as a belief in some entity or entities who exist alongside but outside this material world, outside the natural world. For example, the God in Christianity, ancient Greek gods in Greek polytheism. Also something we'll talk about in a bit among small-scale societies, animism. Nature being animated by all sorts of spiritual energy. So these are all examples of supernatural entities. Also, it could be not an entity, it could be a supernatural sort of substance that brings its possessor power. Many of you maybe have heard of something called manna, either in film or video games, but it's in different cultures, it's believed to be a really powerful spiritual force. So spiritual or supernatural powers, gods, and also something called manna. The culture, different words for manna, so I'm just going to use the term manna. It depends on the culture we're talking about what they would call it. So in Solomon Islands, they used to practice something called headhunting, which literally means different villages would go around and go to war with other villages and take the heads of their captives. The reason for this was to increase one's supernatural power and ability, the person and also the village. The idea is that again, we're oversimplifying, it goes into their beliefs. And the idea is that the most powerful life force resides in certain places of the body over others. For example, if you get your finger chopped off, you're probably going to live. If you get your head chopped off, that's probably it. And so they said this manna, the most powerful energy, the substance, is concentrated in places like the head, maybe the heart, those parts of the body that are most important to our survival. And so the only way, you can only have a finite amount of manna, the only way to increase one's spiritual energy is to capture that of others. Thus, headhunting came about. And in Solomon Islands, headhunting was rampant. So actually, the island of Gizo that I've been talking about this semester, where Titiana and Palange are, it's a small island and it's a really low elevation. And that island was actually not populated until colonialism because of headhunting. Too small and too low of elevation for villages to set up there and be able to protect from marauding headhunters. And so Gizo was actually never colonized by Solomon Islanders. This is exactly why the British, when they colonized Solomon Islands, set up on Gizo, because it was already empty because of headhunting. Of course, with colonialism and missionization, headhunting was eradicated. But one example of this idea of spiritual power or forces, not necessarily in the form of a god or a being, something called noom among the kung. And that's also a spiritual substance. And interestingly, noom among the kung, anyone can attain it, females or males. It's not reserved for a specialized or privileged few. And so that sort of also reflects the egalitarian nature of the kung, right? Anyone can attain noom or become a healer or a shaman. It's not just for certain people. Other characteristics of religion is they typically have myths or worldviews. These are stories that recount the deeds and purposes of supernatural powers. They explain how things came to be. They usually contain worldviews or explanations about how the world works, things like good versus evil or spiritual energy or karma or creationism. And note that myth, it doesn't mean false. We typically think of those as synonymous. A myth is not a true story. It's really easy to see the myths of other groups as false, but our own is true. For example, the story of how Thanksgiving began is a total myth. It began during the Civil War less than 200 years ago, but that's not what we teach everyone in our culture. Another important characteristic is religion's beliefs, practices, and the supernatural all have rituals and symbols. People everywhere believe that supernatural powers or spirits actually care about worldly affairs, and therefore you can actually ask or influence them, try to get them to help you or aid you or shape the outcome or reality of your life. And you do this through rituals and symbols. Symbols, things like the cross or a voodoo doll. And rituals in and of themselves are symbolic actions. Think about it. Rituals they're organized, stereotyped, symbolic behaviors intended to influence supernatural powers, or at least related to the supernatural powers. So it's organized and stereotyped, meaning the action is patterned. It's done the exact same way every time. The same words are uttered, the same movements and actions are performed, same clothing, sometimes even same time of the year or week or day. For example, Christian prayer or church on Sundays. Also, one of the rituals in Catholicism or Christianity, eating the body and blood of Christ symbolically through eating a cracker and wine, although I hear there's no alcohol in it these days. Other examples, doing multiple daily prayers in Islam, facing a certain direction each time. Healing rituals performed by shamans. These rituals in themselves are symbolic. Again, they're performed the same way every time, and they have to be done the same way. If you don't do it the same way, then you're not doing the ritual. You're not doing the symbolic activity. This is literally the meaning of doing something ritualistically, right? Do it the same way every time, a stereotype patterned. Other examples, singing different songs or hymns or prayers. Again, you sort of say the same thing each time, or bathing in a certain river, like in Hinduism in India. Another example Peoples and Bailey give, which is just an interesting one, is among the Hopi, U.S. Southwest indigenous Native American group. And they have something called kachina dolls. You might have seen these growing up or in different stores. Kachina doll, so they're a little doll, kind of the size of a Barbie or something, obviously looks different than that. And among the Hopi, they believe that kachinas are these supernatural beings that live in the hills surrounding the Hopi villages, and that they come into the village, the kachinas, during the spring and the summer. And during this time, Hopi men will do dances and rituals to honor them and dress up to embody them. And this is all done to ensure that the kachinas are, satisfied and that the rains come. Again, rituals and symbols are intended to influence outcomes. There's also secular rituals, things that aren't ritual but not related to religion. For example, graduation is a ritualized activity in our society. Marriage is ritualized, sometimes religiously in a church, sometimes it's on a beach and has nothing to do with religion, but it's still ritualized. Death is another one that's ritualized cross-culturally. So the central question to keep in mind today is religion useful knowledge? To whom and in what circumstances is it useful? What's its purpose? What does it do for us? Again, it's one of those universals. All societies have it. Why? And so anthropologists make an important distinction among different religions. And it's a difference in scale, in the scale of the organization of the beliefs and practices. So it's not a value judgment, it's just a difference in size and scale. And there's, on the small scale, we have local community-based beliefs and practices, tons of different systems of belief and practice that accompany various cultures around the world. And then on the large scale industrial societies, people tend to experience religion in the form of world religions: Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Judaism, Buddhism. And there's only a handful of world religions, unlike the small scale religions. So world religions, religion on the large scale first. A couple of main characteristics that distinguish them from small scale religions. One is all the world religions have a universal moral structure, meaning that there's moral norms and expectations of conduct that apply to people everywhere. They don't just say, you members of the religion need to do this, that the religion would say everyone in the world should behave like this. They are also politically transnational, meaning the religion is not bounded by a national or geographic border. You might not know most or almost all of the people that share your religion. This is very different from how religion is experienced on the small scale, where you know almost everyone. Also, the world religions rely on literacy to transmit them. So they have texts, scriptures, things that go hand in hand with learning the religion. Versus in the small scale, it's not written down, it's passed down via oral history. Literacy is really key to the world religions, especially because they're transnational. And for example, religions of the book, Christianity, Islam, Judaism. In Islam, Quran, the main book, literally translates as to read or to recite. And lastly, the world religions have full-time religious specialists, like a priest or an imam, and that is their sole job. That is what they do. This is not true in small-scale religions. So in contrast, on the small scale, small community-based practices, main characteristics is that they are based on personal, face-to-face, spoken communication. Unlike the transnational world religions, you know most everyone in your religious community, and transmission of the religion doesn't rely on literacy or writing it down. It's passed down through oral history, through stories. Also, spiritual beings and forces are immanent in small-scale religions, meaning they exist within things. They are not somehow separate and apart from the natural world, such as God in heaven, but they are imbued and closely linked within the natural world. The rocks, the trees, the animals all have spiritual energy. It's not somehow, again, separate from the natural world. One example of this in Solomon Islands, I'll do a quick story. Solomon Islands, in Titiana, it was my first field season out there, and I was doing interviews sort of late at night. It started to get dark, and I was in a different section of the village called Nikunau. And so I traveled back over to Mayaki, where I stay in Titiana. And that night, I had the weirdest fucking nightmares of my life. Really weird dreams. So the next morning, I was talking about that in Pigeon to the people I was staying with. And I found out, actually, this was a great way to find out cool little things about their culture. So I was just mentioning I had these really weird dreams. And Henrik, the man of the house, oh, Savannah, it might be because you had bad dreams. It might be because some ancestor spirits followed you home last night. You were over in Nikunau, and that's not our ancestors' territory. That's Nikunau. And so it was starting to get dark, and when it gets dark, the ancestors come out to protect their descendants and their land. And so you were over there, it was getting dark, and you probably got followed home by some of the ancestor spirits that were trying to chase you off, and that's why you had really fucked up, in my words, dreams. And so Henrik said too, he said, so Nick, if that happens again and you're out there late at night giving interviews, try and run around a tree real quick so the ancestor spirit gets confused and loses you and can't follow you home. But anyways, right, the spirits, the energy, the supernatural, it's not somehow separate and apart from the natural world. It's imbued within it, closely linked. And on that note, small-scale practices are woven into daily life. Practicing them is not reserved for certain times of the year or the day or the week, or for certain occasions like holidays. The practices are imbued in most aspects of their life. So they're used for practical reasons, things like curing illness or making the crops grow, ensuring the rains come, technical things like this. One term typically used to describe small-scale religion is animism. And animism is defined as nature being animated by all sorts of spirit beings. So sort of what I was just talking about. Um, in contrast to the world religions, these religions do not have full-time religious specialists. They have part-time religious specialists called shamans. And the word shaman comes from a society called the Chukchi in Siberia in the Arctic. And their healer, religious practitioner, was called a shaman. That's when this type of role was sort of identified among the society. And then the word has then been applied to similar types of people in other societies. So shaman is the word we use. And they're often believed to have specialized knowledge and powers that allow them to do various things, like communicate with the spirits, understand spiritual messages, conduct healing and other rituals, also remove spells. Some of the ways they do this, they access the spiritual realm through trance, or even taking hallucinogens to achieve altered states of consciousness so they can travel into the spirit realm. So I just wanted to give you a real quick example, because we won't talk about shamanism a whole lot, but it's really interesting. I used to teach a whole class on this stuff. There's a great article about Inuit culture in the Arctic, about the sea goddess called Sedna. And so I won't tell you the whole story, but the sea goddess Sedna is key to Inuit mythology in this region. And she lives at the bottom of the sea, and she ensures that the people do well, that game is plentiful, that they have enough resources to get by. When things aren't going well in the society, let's say hunting isn't going well, which is a problem, the shaman will perform a ritual in which the whole community comes together. The shaman enters a trance, altered state of consciousness, and during that, he travels down to the bottom of the sea through the spirit realm, so he's still physically in the room, travels to the bottom of the sea to ask Sedna why the people are experiencing problems. And Sedna, her body's sort of made of the different marine resources that the Inuit rely on. And she has all these tangles in her hair when the shaman sees her. And the tangles are symbolic of the people's problems, either lies or misdeeds that are causing issues for the group. And so the shaman will untangle Sedna's hair. Sedna will tell the shaman what possible problems might be causing the hunting to not be good. And the shaman will travel back up to the non-spirit realm and share with the society what Sedna told him. And so in this article, in this example, there's this one, people start sort of confessing, right? Oh, well, I know I wasn't really supposed to do this, and I didn't tell anyone because I knew that it would hurt this person, but we're supposed to be honest, and so this is what happened. It's cathartic, right? People can talk about stuff that is causing them stress or anxiety, or that they've been holding in, or that someone else is bothering them, and so it's sort of a safe space to let all this stuff out. So this one girl, for example, she confesses that she had miscarried. And in this culture, if you miscarry, you have to throw out all the stuff in the house, the furs, the blankets, everything, because it's said to be polluted from the miscarriage. And so she didn't tell anyone because she felt terrible. She didn't want her family to have to get rid of all their stuff. And so she sort of confesses to this during the ceremony. And so it's cathartic, possibly therapeutic for the community in this sense. People vent and get stuff out that may have been causing tensions, because even if you don't explicitly tell people what you're doing, or you're trying to hide something, in small groups of people or communities, everyone pretty much knows what everyone else is doing, right? You can't really get away with much, and that creates tension. And so through this shaman ritual and coming back up and people sort of confessing taboos that they violated, it's therapeutic for the community, and it usually results in better social relationships. And with better social relations among the group, hunting coordination just might improve. So that's one example of shaman among the Inuit. The examples take different forms depending on where and who we're talking about. So religion among small-scale societies is useful then. It organizes important life events and even more routine activities. For example, in terms of important life events in many cultures, it's religion that organizes this. Rites of passage are considered these major transitional periods in people's life where you transition from sort of one state to another new state. Birth, from being, a fetus to a human being. Puberty, from sort of being prepubescent to sexually mature. Marriage, death, these are all sort of major transitional events. Funerals tend to be the most important rite of passage. This guy, Van Gennep, talks about rites of passage, and he talks about 3 stages. And the first stage is the rite of separation. So let's just take marriage. The rite of separation might be once your partner asks if you want to marry them. That would be sort of the rite of separation. You're no longer single or whatever. You're now engaged. And then there's a liminal state, sort of this middle transitional state where you're sort of betwixt and between. You're not really what you were, but you're not this new status yet either because you're not married yet. And then there's the rite of incorporation or reincorporation, the third final stage, the marriage. And so they go through the ceremony, the ritual, maybe exchange rings or vows, and the person's now married. They've entered a new status, a new role, and been reincorporated back into the community with that new role. This is rites of passage. They can be organized by religion and often are. They also can be secular. Again, we ritualize marriage in the US, but many of us don't do it in a religious sense. Funerals tend to be the most highly ritualized rites of passage in all cultures. And one reason for this is that, like, for example, in the US, we don't really have a ritual surrounding puberty. That one that I can think of, right? Maybe you start to menstruate or you start to get facial hair, but it's not really very ritualized. In other societies, they have extremely elaborate rituals for puberty, for deciding when a boy becomes a man. There's an interesting one called crocodile scars if you want to look up a 4-minute quick video on it. And so the reason that, puberty may or may not be important, marriage may or may not be ritualized depending on the society, but in every society, people will eventually die. There's no sort of way out of that one. So we tend to see this highly ritualized cross-culturally. And there's other rituals that are performed for more routine activities, again, healing or to make the crops grow. So most of us experience religion on the large scale. Industrial society tends to experience it through the world religions. For example, and various polls still support this, the majority of Americans believe in God, the Christian God. And so large-scale religions and societies tend to view animism, small-scale religion, not as legitimate religion, but merely as silly superstitions. Animism is typically thought of as superstitious by large-scale religion, as is magic, witchcraft, and sorcery. They're not considered legitimate religion by the world religions. Superstitions, by definition, serve no logical purpose. But these practices, these superstitions, magic, witchcraft, sorcery, these are actually about shaping reality in people's lives. They are practiced to produce desired outcomes. And in large-scale religion, many actions are also about shaping reality. Think about it, for example, in Christianity, praying, right? Oftentimes people do this not because they're not worried about the outcome, but because they're worried about the outcome. Praying, sticking pins in voodoo dolls, not sinning during your life so that you can end up where you want to in the afterlife. In Hinduism, follow sort of the rules of your caste and you'll be reincarnated into a higher caste. Large-scale religion is also absolutely about shaping reality, just like small-scale. So a couple of distinctions. Magic is defined by externalized actions. It's not like a system of understanding per se. You have to actually do stuff to practice magic, like sticking pins in voodoo dolls. In contrast, witchcraft and religion are more internalized systems of belief. They explain how the world works and sort of why things happen. They're invisible, if you will, at least to most people. Importantly, witchcraft and magic are all about trying to get the gods or spirits or whatever power it is to do what you want them or it to do. And this is really important because our lives are filled with a lot of uncertainty, right? We cannot completely control the outcomes of our lives. Car accidents happen, illness, death, our family, our loved ones get sick, break up with us, whatever. We cannot control completely the outcomes of our lives. They're filled with uncertainty regardless of sort of where you are. So quick question for you. Usually we'd be in class and I would force you to participate, but do you consider yourself superstitious? Um, Definitely superstitious, strongly agree. Maybe, yeah, I'm kind of superstitious, agree. Disagree, no, I'm not really. Or strongly disagree, no, I'm definitely fucking not superstitious. Think about it for a minute though. Is anyone, I think this might be a little more outdated, but like knocking on wood or knocking on your head after you say something you don't want to happen, or like not leaving the house without your ring or your necklace or your charm or whatever it is that someone gave you that's important to you. Or has anyone ever played sports, either individual or team sports, or participated in drama? Think about it. Is magic useful? Let's look at an example from baseball. Hopefully you watched the clip. I don't show them for no reason, so do it. It's for a reason. Okay, so with that, which aspect of baseball has the least amount of superstition associated with it? Pitching, fielding, or hitting? And the answer is B, fielding. So, magic and ritual is used to ensure success in human activities. And people are likely to invoke supernatural forces in situations that they have little control over the outcome, or that are situations that are uncertain. And so George Melch, the author of Baseball Magic that you read for today, and he was a former professional baseball player turned anthropologist. And after the end of one baseball season, he was taking an anthropology class called Magic, Witchcraft, and Religion. And as he listened to his professor describe the magical rituals of the Trobriand Islanders, these exotic so-called primitives, he noticed that what the Trobriand Islanders were doing wasn't really all that different from what he had seen his baseball teammates do at the ballpark for luck. And so Melch explains, U.S. baseball players are more likely to use magic, whether that's ritual, taboo, or fetishes, on those aspects of the game that are unpredictable, like hitting and pitching, rather than fielding, because over fielding players have much greater control. And so he says pitching, regardless of the pitcher's performance, how well the pitcher does that day, the outcome also depends on several other things beyond the pitcher's performance, such as the proficiency of his own teammate to field the ball if it gets hit, how well the other team is playing and batting, and also a little bit of luck. So lots of chance, lack of control involved in that situation, even if the pitcher is playing really well. Hitting is full of uncertainty. Some say it's one of the most difficult sort of positions in sports. Unless it's a home run, the ball might find a gap between the players. It might fall right into the other team's glove. Some of the best batters are only successful maybe 1 in 4 times that they come up to the plate. Fielding, however, Melch explains, chance doesn't really play much of a role. 9.7 out of 10 times, the fielder knows that he's going to execute the play. For example, the average fielding percentage or success rate is 0.975, about 97%, compared to a 0.245, about 25% success rate for hitters. And so Melch says, magic appears in situations of chance and uncertainty. So when a player does well, he doesn't attribute this to his skills alone, because his skills don't really change much from day to day. And so what then explains the difference on a good day versus a bad day? And the argument goes that players make a correlation. They attribute their success or failure to a food they ate, an object they found, an activity they did that day. And players will then repeat those behaviors in an effort to bring more luck. Let's talk about pigeons for a minute. Last clip for the day. You'll watch it in just a moment. B.F. Skinner was a famous psychologist and did research on pigeons. What Skinner learned is that pigeons learn to associate food or getting food, a reward, with whatever the pigeon was doing when they got the reward. So if it was tucking its head and got food, it would then assume if I tuck my head, I'll get more food. And Skinner found the birds will associate the arrival of food with whatever particular action they were doing. Again, tucking their head, walking in a clockwise circle, whatever. Once the pigeon makes the association between the food or the reward and the action they were doing when they got it, only sporadic reinforcement is needed to reinforce that correlation. So what I want you to do now, kind of cool stuff. There was one example that Melch talks about. Again, only sporadic rewards are needed to reinforce that association the pigeons make. One pigeon associated hopping side to side with getting food pellets, and this poor pigeon hopped 10,000 times side to side before finally giving up because they wanted to see how long it would do it before giving up. So the point is many or all of us, we learn to associate things, make correlations with other things or actions or behaviors. Even pigeons do this. And we're often not really conscious of it or what we're doing. We can't always consciously explain it, right? We just know that we do it and it kind of has to be that way. And so hopefully you read George Melch's Baseball Magic. Let's talk about it. What are baseball players' magics?